In the shadows of Braavos, in a temple built of black stone and white, there are men who wear the faces of the dead. They are called the Faceless Men, and they are the most feared assassins in the known world. Their reputation stretches from the free cities of Essos to the coldest reaches of Westeros, whispered about in taverns and council chambers alike. When a faceless man accepts a contract, death becomes not a possibility, but a certainty. No walls are high enough, no guards numerous enough, no distance far enough. The many-faced god will have his due, and his servants are patient, skilled, and utterly without mercy. They do not kill for coin alone, though they demand payment beyond what most can bear. The price of a faceless man's services is never simple. It is not measured in gold dragons or silver stags, though these too may change hands. The price is always the thing you value most. For a merchant, it might be his entire fortune, leaving him a beggar in the streets. For a mother, it might be the child she holds most dear. For a lord, it might be his honour, his lands, or his very name. The faceless men do not haggle. They do not negotiate. They name a price, and you either pay it or you walk away. Most walk away. Those who do not understand that some costs are too high to bear, even for vengeance. Yet, they do not serve only the wealthy. This is perhaps the strangest aspect of their order, the detail that separates them from common sellswords and poisoners who lurk in every city from Old Town to Korth. A beggar may come to the house of black and white with nothing but the rags on his back, seeking the death of the man who murdered his daughter. The faceless men will hear his plea. They will name their price, and if the beggar can pay it, even if that payment is his own life offered in service, they will grant his prayer. Death comes for high and low alike. The many-faced god plays no favourites, shows no preference for crowns over ashes. In this, at least, there is a terrible equality. Their methods are as varied as the faces they wear. Poison is a favoured tool, slipped into wine or smeared on the rim of a cup, delivered through the prick of a needle, or the kiss of envenomed lips. But poison is merely one weapon in an arsenal that includes blades in the dark, falls from great heights made to look like accidents, and illnesses that strike with convenient timing. A faceless man might spend months or even years in preparation, learning every detail of a target's life, every habit and routine, every weakness and fear. They become servants in the target's household, lovers in their bed, trusted advisors at their side. They wear faces taken from the dead, faces stored in the vaults beneath the house of black and white, faces of old men and young women, warriors and priests, nobles and beggars. When they strike, it is with the face of someone the target would never suspect, someone they trust or ignore or pity. Some say there are no more than a few. Dozen faceless men in all the world. Others claim hundreds, hidden in every city, wearing every face, watching and waiting. The truth is unknown, for the faceless men guard their secrets as jealously as any order in the world. What is known is that they have existed for centuries, long before Aegon the Conqueror set foot on Westerosi soil, long before the Doom consumed Valyria in fire and ash. Their order is ancient, their traditions older than the free city of Braavos itself, though Braavos is where they make their home, where their temple stands open to any who would seek the gift of the many-faced god. The House of Black and White sits beside the canals of Braavos, a building both beautiful and unsettling in its stark simplicity. One half is built of white stone, bright as bone, the other of black stone, dark as a moonless night. The temple serves as both a place of worship and a house of death, where those weary of life may come to drink from the black pool and find eternal rest. The poor and sick come seeking an end to their suffering, and the faceless men grant it freely, asking nothing in return. It is their sacred duty, the oldest purpose of their order. Death is a gift, they believe, not a punishment. It is the end of pain, the end of fear, the final mercy that awaits all who live. But who are these men who deal so intimately with death? Where did they come from, and why do they believe what they believe? The faceless men themselves are silent on such matters. They do not write histories or keep chronicles of their deeds. They do not boast of their accomplishments or seek fame for their skills. They are no one, and no one has no past, no history, no story worth telling. Yet stories exist nonetheless, whispered in the secret places of Braavos, hinted at in ancient texts kept by the most learned of meisters. The origins of the faceless men are shrouded in legend and mystery, but the broad strokes can be discerned by those who look carefully enough. The tale begins not in Braavos, for Braavos did not yet exist when the first faceless man drew breath. It begins instead in Valyria, in the freehold that once ruled half the known world with dragonfire and sorcery. Valyria the beautiful, Valyria the terrible, Valyria, whose mines ran deep into the earth beneath the 14 flames, where slaves worked and died by the thousands to feed the freehold's endless hunger for precious metals and gemstones. It was in those mines, in the deepest and darkest pits beneath the volcanoes, that the seed of the faceless men was planted. The mines of Valyria were a nightmare made manifest. The heat was unbearable, rising from the molten rock that flowed beneath the earth, turning the tunnels into ovens where men baked in their own sweat. The air was thick with smoke and fumes that seared the lungs and brought madness to those who breathed them too long. Slaves worked naked or in rags, their skin blackened by soot and scarred by burns, their bodies broken by ceaseless labour. They dug and hauled and died, replaced by fresh chattel brought from every corner of the world. Westerosi and Giscari, Summer Islanders and Sarnori, men and women and children of 100 different peoples, all reduced to the same state of misery and despair. The overseers who ruled the mines were priests of the old gods of Valyria, sorcerer lords who commanded fire and shadow. They showed no mercy to their slaves, for in their eyes the slaves were less than human, tools to be used and discarded. When a slave collapsed from exhaustion, he was left to die where he fell. When a tunnel collapsed, burying dozens alive, new slaves were brought to dig in a different direction. The mortality rate was staggering. Most slaves survived only months before the mines claimed them. Some lasted weeks. A few endured for years, their bodies somehow resistant to the heat and the fumes, but even they knew that death was inevitable. It was only a matter of time. In such a place, in such conditions, death was not feared. It was longed for. The slaves prayed for it, begged for it, welcomed it when it finally came. They prayed to the gods of their homelands, to gods they had worshipped before chains were clasped around their wrists and ankles. They prayed to the smith and the mother, to the harpy of Gais, to the great shepherd and the black goat, to deities whose names have been forgotten by history. They prayed for deliverance, for freedom, for an end to their torment. And slowly, over years, or perhaps decades, a new prayer began to spread through the mines. A prayer not for rescue, not for escape, but for the gift of death itself. It was among these desperate, broken souls that the first faceless man emerged. The legends do not record his name, for he gave it up along with everything else that marked him as an individual. He was a slave like any other, worked to the breaking point, scarred by flame and lash. But he heard the prayers of his fellow sufferers, heard them begging for death, and something within him answered. Perhaps it was madness brought on by the fumes. Perhaps it was a vision sent by some dark god. Perhaps it was simply the last act of compassion available to a man who had lost everything else. Whatever the reason, he began to grant the prayers he heard. The first gift was given in secret, in the darkness of the mines where no overseer could see. A man lay dying, his body broken by a rockfall, his legs crushed beyond any hope of healing. He would linger for hours or days in agony before death finally claimed him. The first faceless man came to him in the darkness and offered mercy, a quick end, a release from suffering. The dying man accepted, and the gift was given. It might have been a blade across the throat, swift and sure. It might have been poison, easing him into a sleep from which he would not wake. It might have been hands that pressed tight over nose and mouth until breathing ceased. The method mattered less than the intent. Death was the gift. Death was the answer to prayer. Death was the only God who truly listened. From that first act, a philosophy began to take shape. If death was the only certain escape from the mines, then death was the only God worth worshipping. All the other gods, all the deities the slaves had prayed to in their desperation, had abandoned them. The Valyrian gods certainly showed no mercy, but death came for everyone eventually, high and low, free and slave, Valyrian dragonlord and foreign chattel. Death was the great equalizer, the one power that could not be defied by sorcery or dragonfire. Death was the many-faced god, wearing the face of every deity that had ever been worshipped. For in the end, all prayers for deliverance were prayers for the same thing, an end, a release, peace. The first faceless man did not stop with that single act of mercy. He continued his work, moving through the mines like a shadow, seeking out those who prayed loudest for death and granting their prayers. He was not alone for long. Others joined him, slaves who understood what he was doing and why. They became his acolytes, his fellow servants of the many-faced God. Together, they brought death to those who sought it, and in doing so, they built the foundations of something larger than themselves. They were creating a faith, though they likely did not realize it at the time. A faith built on the simple truth that death comes for all, and that sometimes death is not an enemy, but a friend. But these servants of the many-faced God were not always assassins. They were born in fire and chains, in the deepest mines beneath the earth, as instruments of mercy for the suffering and the damned. How they became what they are today, how they evolved from givers of release into dealers of death for hire, how they escaped the mines and built their temple in Braavos. These are questions whose answers lie ahead. The transformation from liberators of slaves to the most feared killers in the known world is a journey measured in blood and sacrifice, in choices made and prices paid. The faceless men did not begin as executioners of the powerful. They began as the last comfort of the powerless, the final friends of the forgotten and the forsaken. And perhaps that is what makes them so terrifying. They remember where they came from. They remember what it means to have nothing, to be nothing, to want nothing but an end to pain. They serve death not because they love killing, but because they understand, in a way few others can, that death is the one gift no one can refuse forever. It comes for beggar and king alike, and the faceless men are merely its servants, hastening what must inevitably occur. The horrors of the Valyrian mining operations defied comprehension. To understand the faceless men, one must first understand the crucible in which they were forged, the hell beneath the earth that gave birth to their faith and their purpose. The 14 flames were not merely volcanoes. They were the beating heart of Valyrian power, the source of the sorcery and strength that allowed the freehold to dominate the known world for thousands of years. Beneath those mountains of fire lay veins of gold and silver, deposits of precious gems, and perhaps most important of all, the strange ores and minerals that Valyrian smiths used to forge their legendary steel and fuel their arcane rituals. To extract these treasures, the Valyrians needed labourers who could work in conditions that would kill ordinary men within days. The solution was simple and brutal. Slaves. Not merely slaves, but expendable slaves. People captured in war or bought in the flesh markets of Slavers Bay and other ports. People who could be worked until they died, and then replaced with fresh bodies from a seemingly inexhaustible supply. The Valyrians at their height controlled vast territories and subjugated entire peoples. There was never a shortage of slaves to feed into the mines beneath the 14 flames. The heat in the deepest tunnels was beyond anything experienced on the surface, even in the deserts of Dawn or the red waste east of the Dothraki Sea. The slaves worked in the bowels of the earth, where the rock itself was warm to the touch and the air shimmered with rising heat. In some tunnels, the temperature was hot enough to blister exposed skin within minutes. In others, molten rock flowed in rivers of liquid fire, casting an orange glow that provided the only light the slaves would ever see. There were no torches in the deepest mines, no need for them. The glow of the earth itself illuminated the nightmare. The slaves breathed air thick with sulphurous fumes and ash. The smoke stung their eyes and seared their lungs with every breath. Many developed terrible coughs that brought up blood and black phlegm. Some went blind from the constant irritation, their eyes ruined by the caustic air. Others lost their minds, driven mad by the fumes or by the sheer hopelessness of their situation. Madmen in the mines were common enough that the overseers barely noticed them anymore. A slave who began talking to shadows or claiming to see visions was simply worked until he died, which usually did not take long. The labour itself was backbreaking beyond measure. Slaves wielded picks and hammers, chipping away at solid rock for hours on end. Their hands blistered and bled, the skin wearing away until bone showed through. When a slave's hands became too damaged to grip his tools, he was given the simplest tasks, hauling baskets of broken rock from the tunnels to the sorting areas, carrying loads that would strain a healthy man's back until his body finally gave out. The overseers demanded constant productivity. Slaves who slowed or stopped were beaten. Slaves who collapsed were dragged aside and left to die. The mines consumed human life the way a fire consumes dry wood, quickly and without remnant. Food was scarce and of the poorest quality. The slaves ate whatever scraps were thrown to them, mouldy bread and rancid meat, thin gruel that provided barely enough nourishment to keep them alive. Water was rationed, tepid and foul-tasting, drawn from underground streams that ran near the volcanic heat. Many slaves suffered from constant thirst, their bodies dried out by the brutal temperatures and inadequate water supplies. Dehydration killed as many as accidents or the fumes, leaving corpses shriveled and desiccated, mummified by the heat before they could even begin to rot. Sleep was taken in shifts in crowded chambers carved from the rock, spaces barely tall enough to sit upright, packed with bodies that lay pressed together in the darkness. There was no comfort, no privacy, no respite from the heat or the despair. Slaves slept in their own filth, surrounded by the sick and the dying, breathing the same foul air they breathed while working. Dreams, when they came, were fever visions and nightmares. Most slaves learned not to sleep deeply, for sometimes the overseers would come in the night, dragging away men and women for purposes best not contemplated. The mines took everything from those who labored in them: dignity, hope, humanity itself. The overseers who ruled this underworld were priests of the Valyrian gods, sorcerers who commanded powers that seemed divine to the ignorant and terrifying to everyone else. They wore robes marked with glyphs of power and carried staves that could summon fire or strike a man dead with a word. Some were tattooed with dragon scales, marks of their devotion to the beasts that made Valyria supreme. These priests saw the slaves as less than animals, as things without souls or worth beyond their labor. A slave might be worked for months and then sacrificed in a ritual meant to appease the fire gods or ensure a rich vein of ore. The priests did not see murder in such acts. They saw utility. They saw offerings. They saw the natural order of the world, where the strong ruled and the weak existed only to serve. In the face of such cruelty, in the grip of such absolute despair, the slaves turned to prayer. They came from 100 different lands and cultures, brought to the mines in chains from every corner of the world the Valyrians had conquered. They spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, followed different customs. But in the mines, those differences meant nothing. Suffering was universal. Pain spoke a language everyone understood. And so they prayed, each to their own gods, begging for deliverance, for rescue, for some miracle that would free them from their torment. The Westerosi among them prayed to the Seven, calling on the Mother for mercy and the warrior for strength, pleading with the stranger to take them swiftly when their time came. The faithful of Giz prayed to their Harpy, though their great empire had fallen to Valyria long ago, and their goddess seemed to have abandoned them to their fate. The followers of the Great Shepherd whispered their devotions, asking for guidance to green fields beyond death. Others called on gods whose names have been lost to history, deities of peoples long since vanished from the earth, cultures erased by Valyrian conquest and the steady march of centuries. But the gods did not answer. The mother did not comfort. The warrior did not grant strength. The harpy did not strike down the Valyrian oppressors. The prayers rose like smoke from the mines, and like smoke they dissipated into nothing. The slaves continued to suffer. The overseers continued to drive them. The mines continued to consume lives by the hundreds and thousands. Whatever mercy the gods of distant lands might offer, it didn't extend to the pits beneath the 14 flames. The slaves were alone in their agony, abandoned by heaven and forsaken by the world above. It was in this crucible of suffering that a new prayer began to take shape. Not a prayer for rescue, not a prayer for freedom or justice or vengeance, a prayer for death. A simple plea for an end to the pain, for release from the endless torment of existence in the mines. The slaves began to welcome death, to see it not as an enemy, but as the only friend they had left. When a man collapsed and breathed his last, those around him felt not sorrow, but envy. When a tunnel collapsed and buried a dozen workers alive, the survivors thought not of the tragedy, but of the mercy of a quick end compared to the slow death that awaited them all. This shift in perspective, this transformation of death from terror to comfort, created the conditions for the first faceless man to emerge. The histories do not record his name, and that is fitting, for he would ultimately abandon it, along with everything else that marked him as an individual. He was a slave, one among thousands, worked to exhaustion and despair like all the others. But he possessed something that set him apart. Perhaps it was compassion that had somehow survived the mind's attempt to crush all humanity from its victims. Perhaps it was a kind of terrible wisdom, an understanding that the only power the slaves possessed was the power to choose how they died. Perhaps it was simply madness, given purpose. Whatever drove him, the first faceless man began to answer the prayers he heard, echoing through the dark tunnels. He heard men begging for death, and he gave them what they asked for. The first gift was given to a man whose legs had been crushed in a rockfall, a poor soul who lay in agony knowing that his injuries meant a slow death over days or weeks. The overseers would not waste resources on a slave who could no longer work. They would leave him where he lay until he died of thirst or infection or simple despair. But the first faceless man came to him in the darkness and offered a choice: continue suffering until the end came naturally, or accept the gift of a swift death, a release from pain. The dying man accepted. The gift was given. One small mercy in an ocean of cruelty, one moment of compassion in a place where compassion had no home. But it was a beginning. The first faceless man did not stop with that single act. He moved through the mines like a shadow, seeking out those who prayed loudest for death, those who had given up all hope of rescue or escape and wanted only an end. He learned to read the signs of men who had reached the breaking point, the hollow eyes and slack expressions of those who had surrendered to fate. He went to them, and he offered them the gift. Others noticed what he was doing. In whispered conversations in the sleeping chambers, in quiet words exchanged during the brief moments when the overseers were not watching, word spread of the man who brought mercy to the suffering. Some were horrified, seeing murder where he saw kindness. But many understood. Many agreed. And some stepped forward to join him in his work. They became his first acolytes, fellow servants of an unnamed God, ministers of mercy in a place where mercy was the rarest treasure of all. Together, they began to develop a philosophy, a framework to understand what they were doing and why. They observed that death came for everyone, slave and overseer alike, Valyrian dragonlord and foreign captive. Death played no favorites. Death recognized no distinctions of rank or power. In death, all men were equal. The Valyrian gods might favor their chosen people, but death did not. Death was the one true god, the only deity that answered every prayer eventually. And if death was a god, then surely death had many faces, for every culture had its own vision of the end, its own deity or force associated with dying. The stranger of the seven, the lion of night worshipped in Yitai, the pale mare that the Dothraki feared, all of them were faces of the same god, death, the many-faced god. This realization transformed their work from simple mercy-killing into something larger, something that approached true faith. They were not murderers, they were priests. They served the only God who truly mattered, the only power that could not be defied or denied. When they gave the gift of death to a suffering slave, they were not ending a life. They were delivering a soul to their God, fulfilling a prayer, performing a sacred duty. The act became ritual. The method became liturgy. What had begun as desperate compassion evolved into structured belief. They refined their techniques, learning which poisons could be extracted from the strange fungi that grew in the damp corners of the tunnels, which pressure points would stop a heart or still the breath. They learned to move unseen and unheard, to approach their supplicants without alerting the overseers or other slaves who might not understand. They learned the prayers of a dozen different faiths, so they could offer each dying man comfort in the words of his own gods before sending him to the many-faced God who waited beyond. They became experts in death, not as warriors or executioners, but as servants and facilitators. But they did not confine their gifts to the slaves alone. This is perhaps the most significant development in the early history of the Faceless Men, the moment when mercy expanded into something more dangerous and revolutionary. The first targets beyond the slaves themselves were the overseers, the cruel priests who ruled the mines with fire and fear, the sorcerers who sacrificed slaves in their rituals and thought nothing of the lives they extinguished. These men, too, would die eventually. Death would come for them as surely as it came for the slaves. And if death was truly the many-faced God, if death was truly impartial, then perhaps it could be hastened. Perhaps it should be hastened. The first overseer died of what appeared to be natural causes, a sudden illness that struck him down in the night. The second fell from a high platform, a tragic accident. The third choked on his food. One by one, slowly and carefully, the early Faceless Men began to deliver death to those who had delivered so much death to others. They did not do this out of vengeance, or at least they told themselves they did not. They did it because the many-faced God demanded balance. They did it because death should come to the powerful as readily as to the powerless. They did it because in death there could be no slaves and no masters, only souls passing into the darkness beyond. From one act of mercy in the darkness, a faith was born, and with it, a terrible purpose that would ultimately reach far beyond the mines beneath the 14 flames, far beyond Valyria itself. The slaves who became the first Faceless Men could not have known what they were creating, could not have imagined that their desperate philosophy would survive the fall of the greatest empire the world had ever known, and flourish in a free city yet to be founded. But the seed was planted, the gift was given, and the many-faced God had found his first true servants. The fall of Valyria came in fire and ash, in a cataclysm so complete that it shattered the greatest empire the world had ever known in a single day. The 14 flames erupted in a fury beyond comprehension, tearing the very peninsula apart, sending mountains crashing into the sea and turning the land itself into a smoking wasteland. The dragon lords died in their pyramids, their sorceries useless against the rage of the earth. The cities burned, the dragons fell from the sky, and in the space of a single terrible day, 5,000 years of Valyrian dominance came to an end. The Doom, it would be called in the centuries to come, and the name was apt. Nothing remained but ruins and demons and the smoking sea that would claim the life of any foolish enough to sail its waters. But some survived. Away from the peninsula itself, in the colonies and territories the freehold had claimed across Essos, Valyrians watched their homeland die from a distance. And in the mines beneath the 14 flames, in those last moments before the earth opened and swallowed everything, some few souls escaped the inferno. The overseers perished consumed by the fires they had worshipped. The vast majority of slaves died as well, buried alive or burned to nothing. But a handful made it out, fleeing through tunnels that had not yet collapsed, emerging into a world transformed by catastrophe. Among those survivors were the servants of the many-faced God. The early faceless men, those who had begun as givers of mercy and evolved into something more, escaped the doom that claimed their masters. Whether this was fortune, divine intervention, or careful planning remains a matter of speculation. Some histories suggest the faceless men had knowledge of what was coming, that they chose the moment of the doom to make their escape. Other accounts paint their survival as nothing more than chance, the random luck that allows some to live when thousands die. The truth is lost to time and the deliberate silence of the faceless men themselves, who keep no records and tell no tales. What is certain is that the freed slaves scattered across Essos in the chaos that followed the doom. The collapse of Valyria created a power vacuum that would take centuries to fill, as the free cities fought among themselves for dominance, and the former territories of the freehold splintered into squabbling city-states and petty kingdoms. In this new world, the survivors of the mines had to find their place. Most simply tried to build new lives, to forget the horrors they had endured, and start again as free men and women. But the faceless men could not forget. They had been transformed by their experiences beneath the earth. They had found faith in the darkness, discovered a God who answered prayers when all others remained silent. They could not simply walk away from that revelation. They made their way to Braavos, the secret city, the refuge of escaped slaves, and the one free city that had never been part of the Valyrian freehold. Braavos had been founded in secrecy generations before the doom, built by escaped slaves who fled their Valyrian masters and hid themselves in the mists and lagoons of the northern coast. It was a city built on freedom, a place where slavery was forbidden, and all men were equal under law, at least in principle. For the faceless men, it was the perfect home, a city that understood what it meant to escape bondage, a city that valued secrets and discretion, a city where a new faith could take root without interference from established powers or ancient priesthoods. In Braavos, the faceless men began to organize themselves properly. What had been a loose association of like-minded individuals in the mines became a true order, structured and disciplined. They pooled their knowledge and their skills, codifying the techniques they had developed through trial and error in the tunnels beneath the 14 flames. They began to train new members, recruiting from among the desperate and the faithful those who could understand and accept the philosophy of the many-faced God. And most importantly, they built their temple, the House of Black and White, the physical manifestation of their faith and the center of their power. The House of Black and White stands beside the canals of Braavos to this day, and it is like no other temple in the known world. The building is split down the middle, one half constructed of white stone that gleams in the sunlight like polished bone, the other of black stone so dark it seems to swallow light. The symbolism is deliberate and profound, black and white, dark and light, life and death. The many-faced God encompasses all of these, for death comes in many forms and wears many faces. The duality of the temple's construction reflects the dual nature of the faceless men's mission. They are both priests who tend to the dying, and assassins who bring death to those whose time has come, whether naturally or by design. Within the temple's walls lies the black pool, fed by an underground stream, its waters still and dark as a moonless sky. This pool serves a sacred purpose. Those who are weary of life, who have suffered all they can bear and wish for release, may come to the house of black and white and drink from the pool. The water is poisoned, though with what substance remains a closely guarded secret. Those who drink find a gentle death, slipping away into sleep and never waking. The faceless men ask nothing of those who come to the pool seeking the gift. They do not demand payment or penance. They do not question whether the supplicant truly deserves to die. Death is a gift, freely given to any who ask for it. This is the oldest purpose of the order, the original mercy that gave birth to the faith, preserved and honored even as the faceless men took on other, darker duties. The walls of the temple are lined with alcoves, and in these alcoves rest the faces of the dead. Hundreds upon hundreds of faces, perhaps thousands, preserved by methods known only to the faceless men. When a person comes to the house of black and white and drinks from the black pool, their face is added to the collection after death has claimed them. These faces are not mere trophies or decorations. They are tools of the faceless men's trade, worn by the assassins when they go out into the world to deliver death to those who have been marked. The magic that allows a faceless man to wear another's face and take on their appearance is one of the deepest mysteries of the Order, a power that defies easy explanation and speaks to abilities beyond simple mummery or disguise. The theology of the many-faced God became more refined and structured in Braavos. The faceless men teach that there is only one God, a God of death that has been worshipped under many names, in many lands throughout history. The stranger of the seven is the many-faced God. So is the black goat of Kyohor. So is him of many faces worshipped in the free cities. So are the gods of death from every culture and creed that has ever existed. They are all the same entity, wearing different masks, appearing in different forms to different peoples. Death is universal. Death is inevitable. Death is the one truth that cannot be denied. Therefore death is God, and all who worship death in any form are worshipping the same power. This theological framework is both elegant and terrifying in its implications. If all gods of death are the same God, then the faceless men serve every religion and no religion at the same time. They are not bound to any particular faith or culture. They can move between societies, taking on the trappings of local belief systems, because they understand that beneath the surface variations, all faiths acknowledge the same fundamental reality. Everyone dies. In this way, the faceless men position themselves as the ultimate religious authority, the servants of the only God that truly matters, the only deity whose promises are always kept. But serving the many-faced God requires sacrifice, and not merely the sacrifice of a target's life. Those who would join the faceless men must give up everything that makes them who they are. They must surrender their names, their identities, their pasts, and their desires. They must become no one. This is perhaps the most difficult aspect of the Order's discipline, the test that separates those who can truly serve from those who only think they can. To be a faceless man is to erase yourself, to cut away every attachment and loyalty until nothing remains but pure service to death itself. Family is forgotten. Homeland is abandoned. Even personal preferences and individual quirks must be suppressed or eliminated. A faceless man is a vessel, nothing more, a tool wielded by the many-faced God to accomplish his purposes. This philosophy of self-negation serves a practical purpose as well as a spiritual one. An assassin with no attachments cannot be blackmailed or manipulated. An assassin with no identity cannot be traced or hunted. An assassin with no personal desires will not be tempted to abuse their power for selfish ends. The Faceless Men's greatest strength lies not merely in their skills or their magic, but in their absolute reliability. When they accept a contract, personal feelings never interfere. They do not refuse a target because they like them or accept one because they hate them. They are instruments of death, nothing more and nothing less. The price system developed by the Faceless Men reflects this same principle of sacrifice and detachment. When someone comes to the House of Black and White, seeking to hire the Faceless Men, they are not quoted a fee in gold. Instead, the Faceless Men name a price based on what the supplicant values most. For a wealthy merchant, the price might be his entire fortune, every coin and property he owns. For a mother, it might be the life of her child. For a lord, it might be his lands, his title, or his honor. The price is always something that costs the supplicant dearly, something that will leave them diminished and changed. This ensures that only those who are truly desperate, truly committed to seeing their target dead, will pay what the Faceless Men demand. But the price system serves another purpose as well. It maintains the order's independence and impartiality. If the Faceless Men accepted mere gold for their services, they would become just another band of assassins for hire, available to the highest bidder. Instead, by demanding prices that hurt, that require genuine sacrifice, they ensure that their services are not casually employed. Kings and beggars alike can hire the Faceless Men, but both must pay in proportion to their means and their attachments. A beggar who has nothing but his life may offer his life in service, spending years working for the order to pay for a single death. A queen may have to give up her crown. The equality is not in the objective value of what is paid, but in the subjective cost to the one who pays. This system also allows the Faceless Men to serve all, as their theology demands. The many-faced God plays no favorites. Death comes for rich and poor, powerful and weak. Therefore, the Faceless Men cannot refuse to serve the powerless simply because they lack gold. The beggar's prayer is as valid as the Lord's, and if the beggar can pay the price the Faceless Men name, his target will die just as surely as if a king had ordered it. In this way, the order maintains its connection to its origins in the mines, where slaves prayed for death and found an answer. The Faceless Men are still answering those prayers, though now they do so with a sophistication and organization that would have been unimaginable to the first servants of the many-faced God. Yet the question remained, both then and now. Were they truly servants of the desperate, or had they become something else entirely? In the centuries since the Doom, the Faceless Men have carried out contracts that shaped the political landscape of Essos and even Westeros. They have killed kings and merchants, generals and priests, removing key figures at critical moments in history. Some of these deaths served obvious purposes, settling feuds or removing obstacles. Others seemed random, their purpose obscure. And still, others have led scholars and speculators to wonder if the Faceless Men might be playing a longer game, pursuing objectives known only to themselves. The transformation from liberators of suffering slaves to the most feared assassins in the world was complete. The House of Black and White stood as testament to that evolution, a temple to death that served as both sanctuary for the despairing and headquarters for killers without equal. The faith born in darkness had found the light, or at least a twilight existence, in the canals and shadows of Braavos. The many-faced God had his house, his priests, and his purpose. And the world would learn to fear the gift those priests brought, even as the desperate continued to seek it out. But were they architects of a far deeper game than anyone suspected? Were their contracts random, or did they serve some hidden pattern? These questions would haunt those who studied the Faceless Men, and the answers, if they existed at all, remained locked behind the black and white walls of their temple, guarded by men and women who had given up their very names to serve a god of death. To surrender your identity is to die while still breathing. To become no one is to murder yourself more thoroughly than any blade could accomplish, to cut away every piece of who you were until nothing remains but an empty vessel waiting to be filled with purpose. This is what the Faceless Men demand of those who would join their ranks. Not merely skill with poison or proficiency with a blade, though these things are taught and mastered. Not merely loyalty or dedication, though these too are expected. What the Faceless Men require is total self-annihilation, the complete erasure of the person you were in service to what you will become. It is a transformation more profound than any physical change, more permanent than any scar, and most who attempt it fail. The recruitment of new Faceless Men is a process shrouded in mystery, as secretive as everything else about the Order. They do not advertise for apprentices or hold trials where the ambitious can prove themselves. Instead, they seem to find those they want, drawn to individuals who possess certain qualities or who find themselves in particular circumstances. Some come to the House of Black and White, seeking the gift of death for themselves, only to be offered a different path. Others are noticed by Faceless Men operating in the world, identified as potential candidates and invited to present themselves at the temple. A few are sold to the Order as children, given up by parents who owe debts to the Faceless Men, or who see an opportunity to place their offspring in a position of power, however strange and terrible that power might be. What is known, from the accounts that can be pieced together, comes largely from the experience of Arya Stark of Winterfell, the daughter of Eddard Stark, who found her way to Braavos and the House of Black and White in the years following her father's execution. Her journey through the early stages of training provides a rare window into how the Faceless Men shape raw material into finished instruments. It must be noted clearly that her experience represents a single canonical example, one path among potentially many, and that the Faceless Men may well adjust their methods based on the individual candidate. But the broad strokes of her training likely reflect the universal requirements of the Order, the tests that all must pass to progress from novice to full member. The first lesson is humility, delivered through the most menial of tasks. Arya was set to work cleaning the House of Black and White, scrubbing floors and washing bodies, performing the lowliest duties without complaint or explanation. This was not arbitrary cruelty or simple hazing. It was a deliberate breaking down of pride and status. Arya had been a lord's daughter, raised in a castle, accustomed to servants attending to her needs. Now she was the servant, and her charges were corpses who could offer neither thanks nor recognition. The work stripped away the trappings of her former life, forcing her to confront the reality that her birth and her name meant nothing within these walls. She was not Arya Stark here. She was barely even Arya. She was simply a girl, no different from any other, with no special privileges and no immunity from the hardest and ugliest work. While performing these duties, she was taught to truly see those who came to the House of Black and White seeking the gift. The sick and the elderly, the despairing and the broken, people from every walk of life who had reached the end of their endurance and sought release. She learned their stories, or what stories they chose to share. And in doing so, she learned the 1,000 faces that suffering wears. A woman dying slowly of a wasting disease. An old man who had outlived everyone he loved and could not bear the loneliness. A young mother whose child had died and who could not find the will to continue. Each had their own reasons, their own pain, their own path to the black pool, and each taught the same lesson. Death is mercy. Death is the gift. Death is not to be feared, but welcomed, when the time is right. The next phase of training focused on observation and deception, the fundamental skills any faceless man must master. Arya was sent out into the streets of Braavos to sell cockles and clams, a simple enough task that concealed a deeper purpose. While selling her wares, she was to watch and listen, to learn the rhythms of the city, to study the people who passed by. She was to notice everything, how a merchant carried himself differently from a sailor, how a courtesan's walk differed from a servant's, how wealth and poverty shaped not just what people wore, but how they moved, how they spoke, how they interacted with the world. She was learning to read people, to see beneath the surface, to identify the details that marked someone's station and history. But observation was only half the lesson. She was also learning to lie. Not merely to speak falsehoods, though that was part of it, but to become the lie, to inhabit a role so completely that no one would question it. As a cockle seller, she was not Arya Stark, or even Arya of House Stark. She was Cat of the Canals, a girl born in Braavos, with a particular history and manner, a character she had to create and maintain consistently. When questioned, her answers had to be immediate and natural, never hesitant or uncertain. She had to know Cat's life as well as she'd known her own, to the point where the lie became a kind of truth. This is the foundation of the Faceless Men's greatest ability, the skill that sets them apart from ordinary assassins and spies. They do not simply disguise themselves, they become other people, wearing identities as easily as others wear cloaks. Language training formed another crucial element of the curriculum. The Faceless Men operate across the known world, from Westeros to Yeti, and they must be able to blend in wherever they go. Arya was taught the Braavosi tongue properly, refining the rudimentary knowledge she had picked up on the streets. She learned some High Valyrian, the ancient language of the Freehold that still served as a common tongue among the educated of the free cities. Hints suggest she received at least basic instruction in other languages as well, though the full extent of the linguistic training the Faceless Men provide remains unclear. What is certain is that a fully trained Faceless Man can speak and understand multiple languages, enough to pass as a native in any of the major cities of Essos, and to communicate adequately in Westeros. The study of poisons represents one of the more sinister aspects of Faceless Men training, though from their perspective it is merely another tool in service to the many-faced god. Arya learned to identify toxic substances by sight, smell, and even taste, training her senses to detect the presence of poison in food and drink. She learned which poisons killed quickly and which slowly, which left signs of their presence and which mimicked natural death. She learned how to prepare them, how to store them, how to administer them in ways that would not be detected. The Faceless Men maintain extensive knowledge of toxic substances gathered from across the known world, from simple plant extracts to complex alchemical compounds, from the venom of rare serpents to minerals that could stop a heart with a dose smaller than a grain of sand. Combat training followed, though perhaps not in the form one might expect. The Faceless Men are not warriors in the traditional sense. They do not seek open confrontation or glory in battle. They are killers who strike from surprise and shadow, who eliminate their targets with minimal risk to themselves. Nevertheless, they must know how to fight when circumstances demand it. Arya continued the practice with Needle, her slender sword, that she had begun years before, under different teachers. But she also learned other methods, the use of a knife in close quarters, how to kill silently with bare hands, where to strike to disable or to kill the vulnerable points on the human body that could be exploited. The training emphasized efficiency and certainty over style or flourish. A faceless man who must resort to combat has already failed in some sense. But when combat becomes necessary, it must be ended quickly and decisively. Yet all of these skills, important as they were, served as preparation for the true test, the test of identity, the test of becoming no one. Throughout her training, Arya was repeatedly asked the same question. Who are you? At first, she answered honestly, I am Arya Stark of Winterfell. But this answer was wrong, or rather, it was the answer of someone who was not ready to become a faceless man. She was beaten for it, not out of cruelty, but as negative reinforcement, training her to understand that her name, her house, her history were obstacles to be overcome. The correct answer, the answer that would mark her progression, was simpler and more terrible. No one. I am no one. But saying the words and meaning them are vastly different things. The Faceless Men possess a way of knowing when someone lies to them, a method that is never fully explained, but appears to involve both keen observation and, perhaps, something more, some ability to sense deception that borders on the supernatural. When Arya claimed to be no one while still holding tight to her identity as Arya Stark, they knew. They could see through the lie, could detect the presence of the person she refused to let go. And so the training continued, each lesson designed to strip away another piece of her former self, to weaken her grip on the identity she had carried since birth. The most direct assault on identity came through the faces. The Faceless Men can change their appearance, wearing the faces of the dead, stored in the vaults beneath the House of Black and White. The magic that allows this transformation is among their most closely guarded secrets, never explained in full to outsiders, and taught only to those who have progressed sufficiently far in their training. What is known is that the process involves more than simple masks or physical disguises. When a faceless man dons another's face, they seem to truly become that person, at least in appearance. Their features change. Their height may alter. Even their voice can shift to match the person whose face they wear. It is a magic that defies easy categorization, unlike the flashy sorceries of the Red Priests or the subtle powers of the Wargs and Greenseers. It is quiet magic, intimate magic, magic that serves the practical purpose of deception rather than the dramatic purpose of display. For a novice to wear a face before they are ready is dangerous, potentially fatal. Arya discovered this when she took a face without permission, using it to carry out a personal killing, an act of revenge against someone who had wronged her. The face nearly destroyed her, causing her to lose her sight temporarily, a punishment both for the unauthorized use and for killing someone for her own purposes rather than in service to the many-faced god. The lesson was clear. The faces are not toys. The power to change appearance is not a gift, but a responsibility, one that can only be wielded by those who have truly let go of their own identity. To wear another's face while still clinging to your own is to invite disaster, to risk losing yourself entirely in the transition. The spiritual dimension of becoming no one cannot be understated. The faceless men genuinely believe they serve death itself, that their work is sacred, that each life they take is an offering to the many-faced God. This is not mere justification or rationalization. It is true faith, as deep and sincere as any held by the most devout followers of the seven or the most zealous red priests. To become a faceless man requires accepting this faith, internalizing it until it shapes every thought and action. One must believe that death is not evil, that it is a natural and necessary part of existence, that hastening it in service to the god is not murder, but ministry. Without this belief, the psychological weight of what a faceless man does would be unbearable. With it, each killing becomes a sacrament, each contract a prayer answered. Not everyone can make this transformation. Most who attempt it fail. Some cannot let go of their identities, clinging to their names and histories, no matter how much training they receive. Others master the skills, but cannot accept the philosophy, unable to reconcile what they are being asked to do with their own moral compass. Still, others simply lack the talent for deception, the ability to become someone else so completely that not even those who knew the original would suspect the substitution. The faceless men are selective, precisely because the transformation they demand is so extreme. Better to have a handful of truly capable servants than an army of half-trained assassins who might fail at critical moments or whose loyalties might waver. Those who do succeed, who pass through all the trials and emerge on the other side, become something both less and more than human. Less because they have surrendered the individuality that makes a person unique, the attachments and desires and memories that create a sense of self. More because they have gained abilities and freedoms that ordinary people cannot imagine. The power to be anyone, to go anywhere, to accomplish goals that would be impossible for someone bound by a single identity. They are the perfect spies, the ultimate assassins, servants of death who move through the world like ghosts, visible but never truly seen, present but never truly known. To kill for the many-faced God, one must first kill oneself. The self must die so that the servant can be born. And what happens when a faceless man remembers who they were, when the old identity resurfaces and threatens the carefully constructed emptiness? That question haunts the Order, a persistent danger that no amount of training can entirely eliminate. For humans aren't meant to be empty vessels. Memory has a way of persisting. Identity has a way of reasserting itself. And when it does, when a faceless man begins to care again about who they were or what they want, the entire foundation of their power becomes unstable, threatening to collapse and bring them down with it. The contracts that change the world are rarely recorded in the histories that meisters compile, or that bards sing in the halls of lords. Official accounts speak of natural deaths and tragic accidents, of illnesses that struck at convenient moments and falls from great heights that seemed like nothing more than misfortune. But those who know where to look, who understand the patterns and the probabilities, can sometimes glimpse the hand of the faceless men in events that shaped the course of nations. The trail they leave is faint, deliberately obscured, but it exists for those with eyes to see it. Kings have died when their deaths served purposes unclear at the time. Heirs have perished before they could inherit. Generals have fallen ill on the eve of crucial campaigns. And in each case, one might ask whether the many-faced god acted alone or whether his servants hastened what would have come eventually. The documented history of the faceless men's activities is fragmentary at best. They keep no records of their contracts, maintain no archives listing those they have killed and those who paid for the killings. Everything is memory and oral tradition, passed from master to apprentice in the quiet halls of the House of Black and White. What the wider world knows comes from speculation, from patterns detected after the fact, from rare instances where the involvement of the faceless men became impossible to ignore or deny. These glimpses into their work reveal an organization that has influenced the political landscape of both Essos and Westeros for centuries, though the full extent of their impact may never be known. In the free cities, the faceless men's presence has been felt most acutely. Braavos is their home, and it would be naive to think they have not occasionally acted in the city's interests, though proving such involvement is another matter entirely. The death of Uthero Zalene, the Sea Lord of Braavos some 80 years before the War of the Five Kings, remains suspicious to those who study such things. Zalene had been negotiating a treaty with Pentos that would have strengthened that city's position at Braavos' expense, granting Pentos access to trade routes the Braavosi had long controlled. He died suddenly of what was declared to be a seizure of the heart, and the treaty died with him. His successor showed no interest in reviving the negotiations. Was this the many-faced god acting through natural means, or did someone in Braavos decide the Sea Lord's death was worth whatever price the faceless men demanded? The question cannot be answered with certainty, but the timing was remarkably convenient. The merchant princes of the free cities have long been rumoured to employ the faceless men to eliminate rivals and obstacles to their ambitions. Proof is scarce, for obvious reasons. Those who hire the faceless men do not boast of it, and the faceless men themselves never confirm or deny specific contracts. But the pattern is suggestive. A merchant on the verge of securing a monopoly on the spice trade dies in his sleep. A banking house that threatened to collapse, taking half the city's economy with it, finds its most problematic creditor dead of poisoned wine. A fleet that would have broken a trade embargo burns at anchor, and the admiral who commanded it perishes in the flames. Individual incidents prove nothing. Taken together, they paint a picture of an organization deeply embedded in the commercial and political life of Essos, a silent partner in schemes that reshape the balance of power. In Westeros, the faceless men's influence is harder to trace, but no less significant for those few instances where it becomes visible. The death of Balon Greyjoy, Lord of the Iron Islands, stands as one of the clearest examples. Balon died when he fell from a rope bridge during a storm at Pike, his ancestral seat. The official account calls it an accident, a tragedy born of bad weather and the treacherous nature of the Iron Islands' architecture. But there are those who whisper otherwise, who note that Balin's brother Euron returned to the Iron Islands with suspicious timing, appearing almost immediately after Balon's death to claim the Seastone chair. Euron himself has hinted at darker knowledge, speaking in his cups of having sailed to Ashai and back, of having visited places where terrible powers dwell. Did Euron hire the Faceless Men to remove his brother? The evidence is circumstantial, but compelling. A rope bridge failing during a storm could be an accident. Or it could be the work of someone who knew exactly which rope to weaken, and when the storm would strike. The fall of House Rayne of Castamere, though primarily accomplished through the brutality of Tywin Lannister, may also bear the fingerprints of the Faceless Men in its earlier stages. Before Tywin's final assault on Castamere, several key members of House Rayne died in ways that seemed natural or accidental, but which weakened the house at crucial moments. Lord Rayne's eldest son perished in what was ruled a hunting accident. A daughter died in childbirth, though she had been healthy, and the pregnancy had shown no signs of complication. These deaths may well have been simple misfortune, the random cruelty of a world that takes noble and common alike without regard for justice or timing. Or they may have been the opening moves in a longer campaign, paid for by someone who wanted House Rayne destroyed, but who preferred to let the Lannisters take the public blame and the lasting enmity. The question of the Faceless Men's involvement in the doom of Valyria itself is one that has occupied scholars and speculators for centuries, though it must be stated clearly and unambiguously that this is theory, not fact. The canonical histories offer no confirmation of Faceless Men involvement in the cataclysm that destroyed the Valyrian freehold. What exists is speculation built on circumstantial evidence and logical inference, a theory that some find compelling and others dismiss as fantasy. Nevertheless, the theory persists and deserves examination, if only to understand why so many believe it, despite the lack of hard proof. The theory begins with a simple observation. The Faceless Men were born in the slave mines beneath the 14 Flames. They suffered under Valyrian cruelty, watched their fellow slaves die by the thousands, developed their faith and their purpose in direct response to Valyrian oppression. When the doom came, it destroyed Valyria utterly, killing the Dragonlords and their families, shattering the empire that had ruled through blood magic and dragonfire for 5,000 years. The Faceless Men survived. More than survived, they thrived, establishing themselves in Braavos and growing in power and influence in the centuries that followed. To some, this looks less like coincidence and more like cause and effect. The oppressed became powerful enough to destroy their oppressors, and did so, creating the conditions for their own rise. Proponents of the theory point to several pieces of evidence, though none are conclusive on their own. First, the Faceless Men possess knowledge of poisons and toxins beyond what most organizations can claim, expertise developed over centuries of practice. Is it so impossible to imagine they might have learned how to poison not just a man, but the earth itself, to introduce substances into the volcanic fires beneath the 14 Flames that would trigger a catastrophic eruption? Second, the Faceless Men's theological opposition to dragons is well documented. They see dragons as abominations, creatures of fire and blood that upset the natural order. The Valyrians wielded dragons as weapons and symbols of power. Destroying Valyria would have meant destroying the greatest concentration of dragons in the world, an act that served both revenge and religious purpose. Third, there is the matter of timing and knowledge. The Faceless Men escaped the doom. Not all of them, perhaps, but enough to preserve their order and their secrets. This suggests they either had advance warning of what was coming, or they caused it themselves, and ensured they were clear of the blast. Fourth, some histories record that in the years before the doom, slaves were being moved out of the mines in unusual numbers, relocated to other parts of the Valyrian territories, or simply disappearing from the records. Could this have been the Faceless Men quietly evacuating their own people, those who shared their faith, or who would be useful to their future plans before the catastrophe struck? The counter-arguments to this theory are substantial and must be given equal weight. First and most obviously, there is no direct evidence, no confession from a faceless man, no record of a contract, no smoking gun that ties the order to the doom. Everything is inference and speculation, patterns that might be meaningful or might be coincidence. Second, the scale of the doom defies easy explanation. The entire Valyrian peninsula was destroyed, torn apart by volcanic eruptions and earthquakes that reshaped the geography of that part of the world. To suggest that poison or sabotage could trigger such a cataclysm requires believing the Faceless Men possessed knowledge of volcanology and geology, far beyond what seems plausible for the time, along with access to substances or methods capable of destabilizing an entire region. Third, the doom did not only kill Valyrians, countless slaves died as well, buried in the mines or drowned when the land sank into the sea. If the Faceless Men caused the doom, they murdered thousands of the very people they claimed to serve, the suffering masses whose prayers had given birth to their order. Would they really commit such an atrocity? The Faceless Men might argue that death is a gift, that the slaves who died in the doom were released from their suffering, but this seems like rationalization of the worst kind. Fourth, the magical nature of Valyria suggests the doom may have had magical causes beyond the reach of poison or sabotage. The Valyrians practiced blood magic and other dark arts. Perhaps they destroyed themselves through their own hubris, triggering forces they could not control. The theory remains popular in certain circles, particularly among those who see the Faceless Men as more than simple assassins for hire, who believe the Order pursues long-term goals known only to themselves. But it is just that, a theory, and one that cannot be proven or disproven with the evidence currently available. What can be said with certainty is that the Faceless Men benefited from the doom. The collapse of Valyria created the conditions for Braavos to emerge from secrecy and become a major power. It eliminated the greatest threat to escaped slaves and those who sheltered them. And it removed from the world the vast majority of dragons, creatures the Faceless Men regard with deep suspicion, if not outright hatred. Their hatred of dragons is documented and significant. When Euron Greyjoy's mute crew was ordered to destroy a clutch of dragon eggs, some whisper that Faceless Men were involved, though again, proof is lacking. The return of dragons to the world, with the birth of Daenerys Targaryen's 3 children, represents a development the Faceless Men cannot view with anything but alarm, if their opposition to such creatures is as deep as some believe. Whether they will act against the dragons or their mother remains to be seen, but the possibility cannot be discounted. The presence of Jaqen H'ghar in Westeros adds another layer of mystery to the Faceless Men's current activities. A faceless man was in the black cells beneath the Red Keep in King's Landing, imprisoned alongside common criminals. How he came to be there and why remains unclear. After his escape, aided by Arya Stark, he made his way north, and eventually appeared at the Citadel in Old Town, wearing a different face, but confirmed through Pate's point of view chapters to be the same individual. What is a faceless man doing at the Citadel? What contract could possibly require infiltrating this Master's seat of learning? The questions multiply faster than answers can be found, suggesting schemes within schemes, purposes that may not become clear for years or even decades. The ripples of the Faceless Men's work extend far beyond the immediate deaths they cause. Remove a king, and a succession crisis might follow, leading to war and the deaths of thousands. Kill an heir, and a different branch of a family takes power, changing the course of a nation. Eliminate a general, and a battle is lost, a war is decided, a dynasty falls. The Faceless Men deal in individual deaths, but the consequences can be catastrophic, reshaping the political landscape in ways that benefit some and ruin others. Whether they consider these wider effects when accepting contracts, whether they care about the chaos they might unleash, is unknown. Perhaps they see themselves as instruments of the many-faced God, unconcerned with mortal politics and ambitions. Or perhaps they are more calculating than they appear, accepting contracts that serve purposes beyond simple payment, advancing agendas that only they understand. The ledger of blood the Faceless Men have compiled over the centuries is written in invisible ink, recorded only in the memories of those who know, and in the suspicious coincidences that historians occasionally notice. But make no mistake, the ledger exists. Kings and merchants, lords and ladies, generals and priests, all have fallen to the gift when their deaths served someone's purpose, and someone was willing to pay the price. The Faceless Men have shaped the world from the shadows, never claiming credit, never seeking recognition, content to let others believe in accidents and natural deaths while they collect their payments and serve their God. And they continue to operate, in Braavos and beyond, quiet servants of death, awaiting the next prayer, the next contract, the next opportunity to prove that no one, no matter how powerful or protected, is beyond the reach of the many-faced God. Do the Faceless Men serve, or do they rule from shadow? This question lies at the heart of every attempt to understand the true nature of the Order. On the surface, they present themselves as servants, servants of the many-faced God, servants of those who hire them, servants of a philosophy that places death above all earthly concerns. They claim no territories, hold no titles, seek no public recognition or power. They are no one, as they themselves insist, empty vessels through which the God of death works his will. Yet their actions have shaped the course of history in ways that seem too deliberate, too precisely timed to be the random work of hired killers with no agenda beyond fulfilling contracts. This tension between their stated purpose and their observed impact has given rise to numerous theories about what the Faceless Men truly want, and what they are ultimately working toward. The first and most charitable interpretation is that the Faceless Men are exactly what they claim to be: pure servants of death with no political agenda whatsoever. According to this view, they accept contracts based solely on whether the price offered is sufficient and whether the target's death serves the many-faced God. They do not concern themselves with politics, with who rules what kingdom or which merchant house controls which trade route. Such matters are ephemeral, the temporary concerns of mortals who do not understand that all power ends in the grave. Kings die, dynasties fall, empires crumble to dust. The faceless men serve the only eternal truth, the only power that never diminishes or fades. Death comes for everyone, and they are merely death's ministers, hastening what must inevitably occur. The supporting evidence for this interpretation is substantial. The faceless men do not discriminate between rich and poor when accepting contracts. A beggar who can pay their price receives the same service as a king. This suggests an organization unconcerned with worldly status or political advantage, one that treats all supplicants equally, because all are equal in death. Their price system reinforces this impression. By demanding not gold, but sacrifice, not wealth, but what the supplicant values most, they ensure that money alone cannot buy their services. A rich man pays more in absolute terms, but the cost to him personally, the sacrifice required, is proportionate to what a poor man must give up. This is not the behavior of mercenaries or political actors seeking to maximize profit or influence. This is the behavior of priests administering a sacrament. Furthermore, the faceless men's willingness to kill anyone, regardless of power or protection, suggests they view all lives as equally available to the many-faced God. They do not refuse contracts because the target is too important or too well guarded. They do not shy away from killing kings or religious leaders or anyone else whose death might have significant consequences. This lack of discrimination could be seen as evidence that they truly do not care about political outcomes, that they see their role as purely instrumental. Someone prays for death, someone pays the price, death is delivered. The ripples that spread outward from that death are not their concern. They serve the God, not the world. The weaknesses in this view become apparent when one examines the patterns of faceless men activity more closely. If they truly have no political agenda, if they are purely reactive, accepting whatever contracts come their way, and fulfilling them without regard for consequence, then their impacts should be essentially random. Some contracts would benefit the powerful, others the weak. Some would advance the cause of stability, others chaos. Over time, the political effects of their work should balance out, creating no particular trend or direction. Yet, this is not what we observe. The faceless men's known or suspected activities seem to cluster around certain types of targets and certain types of outcomes in ways that suggest deliberation rather than randomness. Consider the matter of dragons. If the faceless men truly have no agenda beyond serving death impartially, why would they care particularly about dragons? Yet, there is evidence, admittedly circumstantial, that they do care. They regard dragons as abominations. They may have been involved in attempts to destroy dragon eggs. The theory that they caused or contributed to the doom of Valyria, while unproven, rests partly on the observation that destroying Valyria would have eliminated the world's greatest concentration of dragons. This looks less like random service to those who hire them, and more like an organization pursuing a specific goal, the elimination or reduction of dragons in the world. And if they pursue this goal, what others might they have? The second major theory proposes that the faceless men manipulate world events for unknown purposes. This interpretation sees them as schemers of the highest order, accepting some contracts and refusing others based on how well they align with long-term objectives known only to the order's leadership. According to this view, the Faceless Men are playing a game that spans centuries, moving pieces on a board most people cannot even see. The death of a merchant in Braavos might seem disconnected from the fall of a lord in Westeros, but both might serve the same ultimate purpose, advancing an agenda that will not become clear for generations. The evidence for this theory begins with the observation that the Faceless Men sometimes seem to act in Braavos' interests, despite their claims of neutrality and service to a god rather than a city. Braavos is the wealthiest and most powerful of the free cities, the home of the Iron Bank that can make or break kingdoms with its loans. It is also the headquarters of the Faceless Men, the city where their temple stands and where their order is most deeply rooted. Is it mere coincidence that Braavos' power has grown steadily in the centuries since the Doom? Or have the Faceless Men occasionally tilted the scales in their home city's favour? A merchant prince who threatens Braavos' trade interests dies. A sea lord who would make disadvantageous deals does not live to sign them. A foreign fleet that might challenge Braavos' naval supremacy suffers mysterious losses. Individual incidents mean little, but the pattern suggests an organization that, whatever its spiritual claims, still maintains some loyalty to the city that shelters it. The Doom connection, already discussed in the previous chapter, takes on new significance in this context. If the Faceless Men did cause or contribute to the doom of Valyria, it would represent the single greatest act of political manipulation in recorded history. The destruction of an empire, the reshaping of an entire continent, the elimination of the greatest power the world had known. Such an act would prove beyond any doubt that the Faceless Men are willing and able to shape world events on the largest possible scale. Even if they did not cause the doom directly, their survival and the survival of other slaves who escaped suggests they had some foreknowledge of what was coming. And if they had foreknowledge but did nothing to warn others, that too represents a form of manipulation, a choice to let catastrophe unfold because it served their purposes. The appearance of Jack and Hagar at the Citadel in Old Town raises questions that this theory attempts to answer. What is a faceless man doing among the Meisters? The Citadel is the repository of the world's knowledge, the place where history is recorded and wisdom is preserved. It is also the place where magic is studied, where ancient texts are kept, where secrets are buried in dusty tomes that few ever read. If the Faceless Men are pursuing some long-term goal that requires specific knowledge or the suppression of specific information, infiltrating the Citadel would be a logical move. Jaqen could be searching for something, or he could be there to kill someone. A maester whose knowledge threatens Faceless Men interests, or whose continued life would interfere with their plans. Or he could be there to steal or destroy texts, to erase knowledge from the world, or to acquire it for the Order's use. The theory that the Faceless Men manipulate events for their own purposes is seductive, because it explains the patterns that simple service to death cannot. It accounts for their apparent opposition to dragons. It makes sense of their suspicious relationship with Braavosi power. It provides a framework for understanding why certain contracts might be accepted and others refused, why certain targets seem to be marked for death at times that serve larger purposes. Yet the theory has significant problems that cannot be ignored. First, it requires attributing to the Faceless Men a level of foresight and coordination that strains credibility. To manipulate world events over centuries would require not just patience, but an almost supernatural ability to predict consequences. To see how the death of one person in one place will ripple outward and eventually create the conditions for the next move, in a plan that might take generations to unfold. The world is chaotic. Unexpected events occur constantly. Wars break out for reasons no one anticipated. Diseases sweep through populations. Winters come early or late. Dragons are born after being extinct for more than a century. How could any organization, no matter how skilled or knowledgeable, possibly plan around such randomness? Second, the theory requires assuming the Faceless Men lie about their most fundamental beliefs. They claim to serve the many-faced God, to view death as sacred, to operate from religious conviction rather than political ambition. If they are actually schemers pursuing worldly goals, then everything they say about their faith is deception, a cover story to mask their true nature. This is possible, certainly. Organizations have lied about their purposes before. But it requires believing that every faceless man is in on the deception, that no one ever breaks ranks or reveals the truth, that the faith they profess is entirely hollow. Given what is known about the training and transformation required to become a faceless man, given the genuine belief they seem to hold in their God and their purpose, this seems unlikely. It is hard to maintain a lie of that magnitude over centuries, especially when the lie must be believed by every single member of the organization. Third, what would the Faceless Men's ultimate goal even be? If they are manipulating world events, toward what end? To benefit Braavos seems too small an ambition for an organization of their capabilities. To eliminate dragons addresses one aspect of their apparent agenda, but does not explain everything else. To accumulate power makes no sense for an order that claims to value becoming no one, that strips away identity and personal ambition from its members. Perhaps they seek to spread the worship of the many-faced God, to make all the world recognize death as the one true deity. But they do not proselytize. They do not build temples beyond the one in Braavos. They do not seek converts. If spreading their faith is the goal, they are going about it in the strangest possible way. This leads to a third major theory, one that attempts to reconcile the Faceless Men's stated beliefs with their observed actions by proposing a specific ideological agenda. According to this theory, the Faceless Men seek to eliminate all magic and dragons from the world. They are not political schemers in the conventional sense, not trying to control kingdoms or accumulate wealth. Instead, they are religious extremists pursuing a theological goal, the purification of the world from magical corruption. Dragons represent the most visible and powerful form of magic, creatures that should not exist according to natural law, abominations that upset the proper order of life and death. But they are not the only target. All magic is suspect. All supernatural power is an affront to the many-faced God, who rules over death, and should not have to compete with forces that can resurrect the dead, see the future, or change their faces. The evidence trail for this theory starts with the Faceless Men's demonstrated hostility to dragons, a hostility that goes beyond simple fear or pragmatic concern. They regard dragons as wrong, as things that should not be. This suggests a philosophical or theological objection rather than a merely practical one. If dragons are abominations, what else might fall into that category? The Red Priests of R'hllor can bring the dead back to life, directly interfering with death's dominion. The Greenseers and Wargs of the North command powers that seem to transcend natural law. The Shadowbinders of Ashai practice magics that even the Valyrians feared. The Pyromancers. The Alchemist's Guild create wildfire, a substance that burns with unnatural hunger. All of these represent magical forces in the world, powers that exist outside the normal cycle of life and death. If the Faceless Men's ultimate goal is to eliminate magic from the world, many of their suspected actions make more sense. The doom of Valyria, if they caused it, would have struck at the heart of magical power in the known world, eliminating not just dragons, but also the blood mages and sorcerers who commanded them. Jaqen presence at the Citadel could be related to the theft or destruction of texts dealing with magic, an attempt to erase knowledge of how to practice it. The contracts they accept might be evaluated not just on whether the price is sufficient, but on whether the target's death would advance the cause of reducing magic's influence. A blood mage dies, a red priest dies, a shadowbinder dies. Each death weakens magic's hold on the world, brings it one step closer to the purely natural state the Faceless Men desire. The problems with this theory are numerous. First, it requires believing that the Faceless Men's own abilities, specifically their power to change faces, are not magical. They would argue, presumably, that what they do is a gift from the many-faced god, a sacred ability granted to his servants, fundamentally different from the corrupt magics practiced by others. But from an outside perspective, changing faces looks like magic. It defies natural law. It requires some power or knowledge beyond ordinary human capability. If the Faceless Men oppose magic, they are hypocrites, using magical abilities to fight magic. Perhaps they would argue that their power serves death, and is therefore acceptable, while other magics serve life, or power, or pride, and are therefore corrupt. But this seems like convenient rationalization. Second, the return of magic to the world in recent years, marked most obviously by the birth of Daenerys Targaryen's dragons, but extending to other phenomena as well, would represent a catastrophic failure of the Faceless Men's mission if reducing magic is indeed their goal. Magic was fading. Dragons were extinct. The powers that had once shaped the world were dying out, their last practitioners reduced to performing tricks and minor sorceries. Then dragons returned, and with them magic itself seems to have strengthened. If the Faceless Men spent centuries working to eliminate magic, they have just seen their work undone. What will they do in response? The theory predicts they must act against Daenerys and her dragons, that they cannot allow this resurgence of magical power to continue unchallenged. Whether they will actually do so remains to be seen. Third, the theory does not explain everything the Faceless Men do. Many of their suspected contracts have nothing to do with magic or dragons, nothing to do with any ideological agenda at all. Merchants who die to benefit their rivals, lords who perish in war, succession disputes, political murders that serve someone's ambition and nothing else. If the Faceless Men are ideological crusaders against magic, why do they accept these contracts? The answer might be that they need to maintain their cover as assassins for hire, that they cannot refuse all non-magical contracts without revealing their true purpose. Or, perhaps, they need the payments to fund their activities, to maintain the House of Black and White and support their members. But this brings us back to the question of whether they are truly no one, or whether they are an organization with needs and goals like any other. The ambiguity the text deliberately maintains is perhaps the most important point to acknowledge. George R.R. Martin has crafted the Faceless Men as a mystery. An organization whose true nature and ultimate purpose are never fully revealed. Different characters have different theories about them. Different readers interpret the evidence in different ways. There is no single authoritative answer to the question of whether they are servants or schemers, whether they pursue agendas or simply fulfill contracts. The ambiguity is intentional, a feature rather than a bug, designed to make the Faceless Men more unsettling and unpredictable. What can be said with confidence is that the Faceless Men are more than simple assassins. Their history, their faith, their methods all point to an organization that operates from principles rather than pure pragmatism. Whether those principles are purely religious, focused on serving death, or whether they include political or ideological goals, remains unclear. They may be exactly what they claim, servants of the many-faced God with no purpose beyond delivering death to those whose time has come. They may be manipulators of the highest order, playing a game that spans centuries and encompasses the fate of nations. They may be ideological extremists seeking to purify the world of magic and dragons. Or they may be all of these things at once, an organization complex enough to contain multiple motivations and purposes, pursuing different goals at different times depending on circumstances and opportunities. The connection to the Iron Bank of Braavos adds another layer to the mystery. The Iron Bank is the most powerful financial institution in the known world, capable of making and breaking kingdoms through its loans. The bank has been known to fund the enemies of those who default on their debts, to topple kings who refuse to pay what they owe. Is there a relationship between the bank and the Faceless Men? Do they coordinate their activities, the bank applying financial pressure while the Faceless Men apply more permanent solutions? Or are they entirely separate? Two powerful Braavos institutions that happen to operate in the same city, but pursue independent agendas. The answer is unknown, though the possibility of coordination cannot be dismissed. Perhaps the truth is simpler and darker than any theory can capture. Perhaps the Faceless Men are exactly what they appear to be on the surface. Servants of death who have made a religion out of murder, who genuinely believe that what they do is sacred, who see no contradiction between accepting payment for killings and serving a god. They need not be schemers to be terrifying. They need not pursue grand agendas to be effective. An organization of highly skilled assassins, motivated by genuine religious faith, capable of killing anyone anywhere, answering to no earthly authority and bound by no conventional morality, is dangerous enough without adding layers of political conspiracy. The simplest explanation may be the correct one. They serve death. They answer prayers. They deliver the gift. Everything else is interpretation and speculation, the attempts of those who cannot accept that some organizations might operate from principles alien to normal human understanding. The debate about the Faceless Men's true purpose will likely continue as long as people study the history of Westeros and Essos. New evidence may emerge, new patterns may be detected, or the mystery may deepen, becoming more impenetrable, rather than less as additional information raises more questions than it answers. For now, we are left with uncertainty, with multiple theories that explain some facts but not others, with an organization that remains enigmatic despite centuries of operation. And perhaps that is exactly how the Faceless Men prefer it. Mystery serves them. Uncertainty about their motives makes them more fearsome. An enemy whose goals are known can be anticipated and countered. An enemy whose ultimate purpose remains hidden is almost impossible to defend against. for you never know when they might strike or why. Where the faceless men stand as the great game unfolds is a question that grows more urgent with each passing moon. The world of ice and fire is changing. Old powers are crumbling. New forces are rising. Dragons have returned from extinction. Magic that had faded to the point of myth is surging back into the world. The dead are walking in the lands beyond the wall. And in King's Landing, on the Iron Throne that Aegon the Conqueror forged from the swords of his enemies, kings rise and fall with such speed that the maesters can barely keep their records current. In this time of chaos and transformation, the faceless men continue their work, quiet as ever, moving through the world like shadows. But their presence in the narrative, their involvement in events that touch directly on the central conflicts of the age, suggests that whatever their purpose, they are far from inactive. Their current known activities center on several key developments, each of which deserves examination for what it reveals about where the Order stands and where it might be headed. The first and most significant is Arya Stark's journey through their ranks, a canonical example of how the Faceless Men recruit, train, and attempt to transform those who come to them. Arya came to Braavos seeking refuge, following a path that had been suggested to her by Jaqen H'ghar himself. She was fleeing Westeros, fleeing the deaths of her family, fleeing the trauma and violence that had defined her life since her father's execution. She was also pursuing something, though she might not have fully understood it at the time: vengeance, the power to kill those who had wronged her and her house, the ability to become someone else, to escape the identity that had brought her so much pain. The Faceless Men accepted her, though she was young and came from a noble house, though she had attachments and desires that should have marked her as unsuitable for their order. They took her in and began the process of breaking her down, stripping away the layers of identity that made her Arya Stark of Winterfell. They taught her their skills. They gave her tasks meant to humble her and educate her. They showed her the faces of death and the philosophies that underpin their faith. And through it all, they tested her, waiting to see if she could truly become no one, if she could let go of everything she had been and transform into the empty vessel their order required. She failed that test, or perhaps more accurately, she chose to fail it. When given assignments meant to teach her to kill without personal attachment, she instead pursued her own agenda, using the skills the Faceless Men had taught her to eliminate people from her personal list of enemies. When she took a face without permission and killed not in service to the many-faced god, but in service to her own desire for revenge, she crossed a line the Order could not ignore. The punishment was severe, a temporary loss of her sight, a reminder that the power to change faces comes with responsibilities and dangers. But even after that punishment, even after additional training and testing, Arya couldn't fully surrender who she was. She remained Arya Stark. She reclaimed that identity deliberately and consciously, taking back her name and her history. When she left the House of Black and White, whether she did so with the Faceless Men's permission or against their will remains ambiguous. The text suggests complexity in that moment, the possibility that the Faceless Men recognized she would never fully become one of them, but might still serve useful purposes. Or perhaps they saw her departure as failure, pure and simple, the loss of a promising candidate who couldn't complete the transformation. What is clear is that Arya left Braavos with skills she had learned from the Order, abilities that make her far more dangerous than she had been when she arrived. She can change her face, though whether she does so through the same methods the Faceless Men use, or through cruder means, is unclear. She can fight. She can deceive. She can kill with precision and confidence. The Faceless Men trained her well, even if they couldn't make her know one. The question that haunts this part of the story is whether Arya will face consequences for her failure to complete her training, for taking skills and knowledge from the Faceless Men without fully committing to their order. The Faceless Men do not take betrayal lightly. They do not allow their secrets to be spread carelessly. A girl who learned their techniques but rejected their philosophy represents a potential threat. Someone who might use their methods without their discipline, who might expose their secrets or tarnish their reputation. Will they send someone to kill her? Will they reclaim the knowledge she stole through her death? Or have they already accounted for her in their plans, seeing her as a tool that can be used even if she does not realize she is being used? The significance of Arya's journey extends beyond her personal story. She provides readers and viewers with the most detailed look inside the Faceless Men's organization that exists in the canonical material. Through her eyes, we see how they operate, what they believe, how they train their members. We see the House of Black and White not as a distant legend, but as a real place with real people, or rather, with real no-ones. We understand that becoming a faceless man requires genuine transformation, that it is not simply a matter of learning skills, but of fundamentally changing who you are at the deepest level. And we see that this transformation can fail, that it is possible to take something from the Faceless Men without giving them everything they demand in return. Whether this possibility represents a flaw in their system or a feature they have already accounted for remains to be seen. The presence of Jaqen H'ghar, or the man who wore that name when Arya first met him, represents another current thread in the Faceless Men's activities. After escaping the black cells of King's Landing and parting ways with Arya, this Faceless Man made his way to Old Town, to the Citadel where the Maesters train, and where the greatest collection of knowledge in Westeros is housed. He killed a novice named Pate and took his face, his identity, his place within the Citadel's hierarchy. This is confirmed through the narrative structure, through Pate's point of view chapter that ends with his death, and the later appearance of someone wearing Pate's face, who must be the Faceless Man who killed him. Why is a faceless man at the Citadel? The question has spawned numerous theories, each attempting to explain what contract or purpose would require infiltrating the Maester's stronghold. One possibility is that he is there to steal something, a book or manuscript containing knowledge the Faceless Men desire. The Citadel's library is vast, containing texts on subjects ranging from history to magic, from astronomy to alchemy. Some of these texts are restricted, kept in vaults where only the most senior Maesters can access them. A faceless man could reach these forbidden books, could take them or copy them without anyone knowing until it was too late. What knowledge would the Faceless Men want badly enough to send one of their own on such a mission? Information about dragons, perhaps, given their apparent opposition to such creatures, or texts dealing with ancient Valyrian magic, or histories that reveal secrets they would prefer remained hidden. Another possibility is that the Faceless Man is there to kill someone. Not a master necessarily, though that cannot be ruled out, but someone who comes to the Citadel, someone whose path will take them there at some point in the future. The faceless man could be waiting, patient as only they can be, for the right moment and the right target. This raises the question of who might be important enough to warrant such an elaborate setup. A member of a royal house, a scholar whose discoveries threaten someone's interests, a maester whose knowledge makes him dangerous. The possibilities are numerous, and without more information, speculation can only go so far. A third possibility, more disturbing in its implications, is that the faceless man is there to destroy knowledge rather than acquire it. The citadel preserves learning, but it also contains information that some might prefer lost. Texts on magic that could teach others how to wield powers best, left forgotten. Histories that reveal truths about the past that powerful people would rather keep secret. Prophecies that predict futures some would do anything to prevent. A faceless man could systematically destroy such materials, burning books or altering texts, erasing knowledge from the world one page at a time. If the theory that the faceless men oppose magic has merit, this would be one way to strike at magic's roots, to prevent future generations from learning how to practice it. The implications of a faceless man operating in the citadel extend beyond whatever specific task he was sent to accomplish. His presence there suggests the faceless men are concerned with knowledge, with information, with the recording and preservation of history. It suggests they are thinking long-term, positioning themselves not just to kill individual targets, but to shape what future generations will know and believe. It connects them to the broader intellectual and magical currents of the story, making them players in conflicts that go beyond simple political machinations. As the great game unfolds, as the wars for the Iron Throne grind on, and the threat from beyond the wall grows more immediate, the question of what role the faceless men will play becomes increasingly important. They have the power to kill anyone, anywhere. They operate without regard for conventional loyalties or political boundaries. They serve a god that cares nothing for the survival of kingdoms or dynasties. In a world tearing itself apart through civil war and facing existential threats from magic and ice, what will the faceless men do? Will they continue accepting contracts as they always have, killing whoever they are paid to kill regardless of the larger consequences? Or will they act more directly, pursuing objectives that serve their own purposes rather than simply fulfilling the desires of those who hire them? The theory that the faceless men will act against Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons is perhaps the most widely discussed speculation about their future role. Daenerys has achieved what should have been impossible, hatching 3 dragon eggs and raising the creatures to maturity. Dragons that had been extinct for more than a century now fly again, growing larger and more dangerous with each passing year. If the faceless men truly oppose dragons as abominations, if they see these creatures as affronts to the natural order and to the dominion of the many-faced god, then Daenerys must be marked for death in their eyes. Her death would not necessarily kill the dragons, but it would remove the one person who can control them, potentially setting them loose to wreak havoc until they could be destroyed by other means. The evidence supporting this theory is circumstantial but compelling. The faceless men were born under Valyrian oppression, suffered at the hands of dragon lords. They may have been involved in the doom that destroyed Valyria and most of its dragons. They regard dragons with hostility rather than awe. And now dragons have returned, bonded to a woman who has ambitions to conquer Westeros and rule the Seven Kingdoms. From the Faceless Men's perspective, if indeed they have a perspective on such matters, Daenerys represents a threat that must be eliminated. The question is whether they will act on that threat, whether someone will hire them to kill her, or whether they will take the initiative themselves. The counter-argument is that the Faceless Men do not act without being hired, that they are not crusaders who pursue targets based on their own judgments of who deserves to die. They serve those who come to them with prayers and payment. If no one hires them to kill Daenerys, they will not kill her, regardless of how much they might dislike dragons. This assumes, of course, that the theory of the Faceless Men as pure servants rather than schemers is correct. If they do pursue their own agendas, if they do act to shape the world according to their vision, then Daenerys and her dragons represent exactly the kind of target they might go after without waiting for a contract. The involvement of the Faceless Men in the conflict beyond the wall seems less likely, but cannot be entirely discounted. The others, the ancient enemy rising in the far north, represent a supernatural threat that makes dragons look almost mundane by comparison. They are creatures of ice and death, beings that kill the living and raise them as undead servants. In one sense, they serve death as thoroughly as the Faceless Men claim to, perhaps more so. They transform the world into a frozen wasteland where nothing lives, where death is not an ending, but a transformation into a different kind of existence. Would the Faceless Men see the others as allies, fellow servants of death? Or would they see them as perversions, creatures that cheat death by denying the finality that the many-faced god demands? The question is complicated by the fact that the Faceless Men deal in individual deaths, in the targeted killing of specific people for specific reasons. The others represent wholesale slaughter, the extinction of all life in an endless winter. It is hard to imagine the Faceless Men approving of such an outcome, even if they serve death. Their god has many faces, but all of those faces are drawn from the living, from the cultures and beliefs of people who exist. If everyone dies, if the world is reduced to an icy graveyard, populated only by the walking dead, there will be no one left to worship the many-faced god, no one to seek the gift, no one to hire the Faceless Men for their services. From a purely practical standpoint, the others threaten the Faceless Men's existence as surely as they threaten everyone else. Whether this means the Faceless Men will take a side in the coming war, whether they will use their skills to fight against the others or to eliminate obstacles that prevent the living from uniting against the threat, remains pure speculation. They could decide that the wars of men are irrelevant, that death will come for everyone eventually, whether by ice or fire or simple age, and that their role is simply to continue serving those who seek them out. They could position themselves to survive whatever comes, preserving their order and their knowledge, so that when the winter ends, if it ends, they will still be there. Or they could surprise everyone by acting in ways no one predicts, pursuing goals that only become clear in hindsight. The unanswered questions that surround the Faceless Men are numerous and may never be fully answered, not in the books that remain to be written, and, perhaps, not ever. What is their ultimate purpose? Do they pursue agendas beyond fulfilling contracts? What is the full extent of their magical abilities? How many of them exist? What are they doing in locations beyond Braavos and Old Town? These questions persist because the Faceless Men are designed to be mysterious, to operate in shadow and secrecy. They are not meant to be fully understood or completely explained. The ambiguity is central to their power, both within the story and as literary devices. What we can say, looking at their journey from the slave mines of Valyria to the present day, is that the Faceless Men represent one of the most unique organizations in the world of ice and fire. They are assassins who are also priests. They are servants who are also masters of their craft. They are no one who are also highly skilled individuals. They were born from an act of mercy, from a slave who heard the prayers of the suffering and answered them with the gift of death. They evolved into an order that can topple kings and reshape nations, and they continue to operate centuries after their founding, still faithful to the God they discovered in the darkness beneath the earth, still delivering death to those whose prayers are heard and whose prices are paid. The fundamental mystery that remains is this: are they heroes, villains, or simply servants of an indifferent truth? From one perspective, they can be seen as liberators, born from the struggle against oppression, offering release to those who suffer, maintaining a kind of equality in a world defined by hierarchy and injustice. From another perspective, they are murderers for hire, killers who dress up their work in religious language to justify taking lives for payment, no different from any other assassins except in their skill and their pretensions. And from a third perspective, they are neither and both, servants of a truth that transcends human categories of good and evil. Death comes for everyone. The Faceless Men simply hasten what must occur. In that sense, they are no more evil than winter or disease or old age, natural forces that care nothing for human desires or moral judgments. The callback to that first slave in the mines, the one who gave the first gift, reminds us of how far the Faceless Men have come and how much they have changed. That slave acted from compassion, from a desire to ease suffering. He saw men begging for death and gave them what they asked for, not for payment or recognition, but because it was the only kindness available to him. From that simple act of mercy grew an organization that now operates across the known world, that kills for pay, that pursues purposes unclear to outsiders. The transformation raises questions about what happens when a movement grows beyond its origins, when an act of individual compassion becomes institutionalized, when the merciful impulse is codified into doctrine and ritual. Has the original purpose been preserved or perverted? Do the Faceless Men still serve the suffering, or have they become something else entirely? When they kill a king for a bag of gold, or a merchant for a handful of jewels, are they delivering the gift, or are they simply murdering for profit? The Faceless Men would argue there is no difference, that death is always the gift, that the many-faced God cares not whether the one who dies is rich or poor, good or evil, deserving or innocent. Death comes for all, and they are merely its instruments. But others might see hypocrisy in an order that began by offering free mercy to slaves and now demands ruinous prices from those who seek their services. The beggar can hire them, yes, but only by giving up everything, often including his own life in service. Is that truly the same as the free gift given in the mines? These contradictions and questions are part of what makes the Faceless Men so compelling as an element of the story. They resist easy categorization. They challenge comfortable assumptions about morality and justice. They force readers to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of death and the value of life. And they do all of this while maintaining an air of mystery, never fully revealing themselves, never completely explaining their purposes or their beliefs. They remain, as they have always been, shadows moving through the world, visible but never truly seen, present but never truly known. If you see the Faceless Men differently after walking through their history step by step, from the mines of Valyria to the canals of Braavos, from acts of desperate mercy to calculated assassination, you are not alone. They are an organization that rewards contemplation, that reveals new facets each time you examine them from a different angle. Share your thoughts and your own theories in the comments below. Do you see them as servants or schemers? As heroes born from oppression, or villains hidden behind religious rhetoric? As mysterious priests of death, or simply skilled assassins with good marketing? The text supports multiple interpretations, and the discussion about what the Faceless Men truly are, and what they ultimately want, will likely continue as long as people read these stories. And if you would like more journeys through the hidden corners of Westeros and beyond, more deep dives into the characters and events that shape the world of ice and fire, you know what to do. Subscribe, and we will continue exploring together, seeking answers to questions that may have no answers, finding meaning in stories that resist simple interpretation, and discovering that the more we learn, the more mysteries remain.